The crystal chandelier above cast dancing shadows across the marble floor as I stood at the entrance of Willowbrook Country Club, my worn jeans and faded t-shirt drawing stares from every direction. What they didn't know was that I held the deed to this entire place in my back pocket. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 3 months earlier, I was just Marcus Thompson, a 34-year-old software engineer who'd spent the last decade building apps in my cramped Seattle apartment. My biggest social interaction was ordering coffee from the same barista every morning. But then my startup got acquired by a tech giant for $47 million. Suddenly everyone wanted to know who Marcus Thompson was. The money changed everything overnight. My financial advisor, Patricia Caldwell, insisted I needed to diversify my investments beyond tech stocks. She suggested real estate, specifically recreational properties that generated steady income. That's when she mentioned Willowbrook Country Club in the affluent suburb of Eastridge, Connecticut. It's been struggling financially for 2 years, Patricia explained during our video call, sliding documents across her mahogany desk. The previous owner, Harrison Blackwell, leveraged it heavily for failed expansion projects. The club's membership has declined, and they're behind on property taxes. It's a steal at $12 million, considering the land alone is worth $20 million. I'd never set foot in a country club in my life. Growing up in Detroit with my single mother, who worked 2 jobs to keep us afloat, places like Willowbrook existed in a different universe. But the numbers made sense, and Patricia assured me it was a sound investment that practically ran itself. The acquisition process took 6 weeks of legal paperwork, background checks, and financial audits. Throughout the entire process, I never visited the property. My attorney, David Reeves, handled the negotiations remotely. The club's board of directors assumed I was just another wealthy investor who'd remain a silent partner. Everything was finalized on a Tuesday morning in March. I officially owned Willowbrook Country Club. It's an 18-hole golf course, Olympic-sized pool, tennis courts, spa facilities, and the grand clubhouse that had hosted Connecticut's Elite 473 years. The irony wasn't lost on me that a kid who'd eaten government cheese sandwiches now owned a place where lunch cost more than my mother used to spend on groceries in a week for 2 months. The club's general manager, Victoria Sterling, sent monthly reports showing steady improvement in finances now that the debt had been cleared. Membership applications were increasing, and several corporate events had been booked for the summer season. Everything seemed to be running smoothly, but then I started receiving complaints. The first came from Maria Santos, a local landscaper whose company had maintained the club's grounds for 8 years. Victoria had terminated their contract without notice, replacing them with a more expensive firm owned by her brother-in-law. When Maria called my office to appeal the decision, she was told the new ownership wasn't interested in charity cases. Next was Robert Chen, whose catering company had exclusively handled Willowbrook's events for over a decade. Victoria cited quality concerns when she canceled his contract, but Robert's food had never received a single complaint. She'd replaced him with Pemberton Catering, owned by her college roommate, charging nearly double the rates. The final straw came when I learned about Tommy Martinez, a 15-year-old from the neighboring working-class community of Riverside. Tommy had been caddying at Willowbrook since he was 12, using the money to help his grandmother pay for her medication. Victoria had banned him from the property, claiming he was disrupting the club's atmosphere by speaking Spanish with other Latino staff members. That's when I decided it was time to visit my investment personally. I drove up from New York City on a Saturday afternoon in late May, taking the scenic route through Connecticut's rolling hills. Willowbrook sat on 200 acres of pristine landscape, with the clubhouse positioned majestically atop a gentle slope overlooking the golf course. The building itself was an architectural masterpiece of red brick and white columns, evoking the grandeur of a southern plantation without the historical baggage. I parked my modest Honda Civic between a Bentley and a Tesla in the circular driveway, already feeling out of place. My wardrobe consisted mainly of jeans, sneakers, and t-shirts from tech conferences. I'd never owned a suit that cost more than $200, and the idea of buying country club appropriate clothing felt ridiculous. This was my property. After all, the massive oak doors opened into a foyer that belonged in a museum. Persian rugs covered gleaming hardwood floors, while oil paintings of long-dead aristocrats gazed down from gold-gilded frames. Fresh flowers arranged in crystal vases perfumed the air with jasmine and roses. Everything screamed old money and established privilege. A young woman in a navy blue uniform stood behind the marble reception desk. Her nameplate reading Jennifer Walsh Concierge looked up as I approached, her professional smile faltering slightly as she took in my appearance. "Good afternoon," she said carefully. "You here for the Harrison Memorial Golf Tournament? I'm afraid registration closed yesterday." "No, I'm just looking around," I replied. "Beautiful place." Jennifer's smile became more strained. "Willowbrook is a private club, sir. If you're interested in membership, we have applications available, though there is currently a 3-year waiting list." Before I could respond, a stern voice cut through the conversation. "Is there a problem here, Jennifer?" I turned to see a woman in her mid-50s approaching us with the bearing of a military general. She wore a perfectly pressed cream-colored pantsuit, her silver hair styled in an elaborate updo that probably required weekly maintenance. Her makeup was flawless, but her pale blue eyes held the warmth of an Arctic winter. "Mrs. Sterling, this gentleman was asking about the club," Jennifer explained nervously. Victoria Sterling, the general manager who'd been making my life complicated for the past month. She looked exactly like I'd imagined, polished, intimidating, and completely convinced of her own superiority. "I see," Victoria said, her gaze sweeping over me with barely concealed disdain. "And you are?" "Marcus Thompson." She didn't recognize the name, which wasn't surprising, since all our communication had been filtered through attorneys and accountants. To her, I was just another inappropriately dressed intruder who'd wandered into her domain. "Mr. Thompson, I'm Victoria Sterling, the general manager of Willowbrook Country Club. While we appreciate your interest in our facilities, this is a private establishment for members and their guests only. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable at the public golf course down the road." The dismissal was clear, but I decided to test the waters a bit further. "Actually, I was hoping to look around, maybe grab lunch. I've heard wonderful things about your restaurant." Victoria's laugh was as sharp as broken glass. "I'm sure you have, but our dining room requires appropriate attire. We maintain certain standards here at Willowbrook." "What kind of standards?" "The kind that have preserved this club's reputation for over 7 decades, she replied coolly. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have actual club business to attend to." She started to turn away, but I wasn't ready to end the conversation. "Go, I wanted to ask about Tommy Martinez. I heard he used to work here as a caddy." Victoria's expression hardened instantly. "That boy was removed from the premises for good reason. His behavior was completely inappropriate for our environment, Mr. Thompson. I don't discuss personnel matters with strangers. Jennifer, please escort this gentleman to the exit." As Victoria clicked away on her designer heels, I realized she'd just made the biggest mistake of her career. She'd written me off as someone beneath her notice, someone who didn't deserve basic courtesy, let alone respect. The irony was delicious. She was so busy protecting her club from people like me that she'd failed to recognize she was talking to the person who actually owned it. Jennifer looked mortified as she moved around the desk. "Sir, I'm really sorry, but I do need to ask you to leave." "It's okay," I told her gently. "This isn't your fault." As I walked back toward the exit, I noticed other staff members watching nervously. A Hispanic man polishing the brass handrails quickly looked away when our eyes met. 2 women in housekeeping uniforms whispered to each other in what sounded like Portuguese before scurrying down a side corridor. The picture was becoming clearer. Victoria Sterling had turned my country club into her personal kingdom, where she decided who belonged and who didn't. She'd fired longtime vendors who didn't fit her vision, banned a hard-working teenager for the crime of speaking his native language, and created an atmosphere of fear among the staff. But what she didn't know was that her reign was about to come to an abrupt end. I sat in my car for 10 minutes after leaving Willowbrook, processing what had just happened. The dismissal stung more than I had expected.
How?
Growing up poor teaches you to develop thick skin. But there was something particularly cruel about Victoria's brand of condescension. She hadn't just asked me to leave, she'd made it clear that people like me would never be welcome in her world. My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia Caldwell asking about my visit to the property. Instead of calling her back immediately, I decided to drive through Riverside, the working-class neighborhood. Tommy Martinez called home. I wanted to understand the full picture of what was happening at my club. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. My name is Marcus Thompson. I heard Tommy used to work at the country club. Her expression darkened. Tommy's a good boy. Works very hard for that family. They now have a reason to fire him. It's had to be Tommy's grandmother. Could I speak with him? I'd like to hear his side of the story. She studied me carefully, taking in my jeans and t-shirt. After a moment, she nodded toward the backyard. Tommy. Vinaka. A skinny teenager appeared around the corner of the house, wiping his hands on a towel. He had his grandmother's suspicious eyes and the guarded posture of someone who'd learned not to trust easily. This man wants to talk about the club, his grandmother explained. Tommy's jaw tightened. I understand, I said quickly. But I think you were treated unfairly, and I'd like to know what really happened. For the next 20 minutes, Tommy told me his story. He'd started caddying at Willowbrook when he was 12, earning money to help pay for his grandmother's diabetes medication and insulin supplies. The previous management had been fine with his work. He was punctual, respectful, and knew the golf course better than most members. Everything changed when Victoria Sterling took over as general manager 6 months ago. She instituted new protocols. That seemed designed specifically to target the Latino staff members. Speaking Spanish anywhere on the property was prohibited, even during breaks or in staff areas. Employees were required to provide additional documentation proving their legal status. Despite having worked there for years, any cultural food brought from home had to be eaten in the basement, away from member areas. The final incident happened 3 weeks ago. Tommy was caddying for a regular member, Dr. Elizabeth Hoffman, who spoke fluent Spanish and often conversed with Tommy in his native language. When Victoria witnessed this interaction, she immediately pulled Tommy aside and berated him for forcing members to accommodate his language preferences. She said I was making Dr. Hoffman uncomfortable, Tommy explained, his voice growing angry. But Dr. Hoffman told me she enjoyed practicing her Spanish with me. Mrs. Sterling just didn't want to hear it. Dr. Hoffman had actually tried to defend Tommy, but Victoria claimed she was responding to multiple complaints about his behavior. When Tommy asked to see these complaints or speak to the people who made them, Victoria accused him of being argumentative and disrespectful to management. He was banned from the property that same day. The worst part, Tommy continued, is that my grandmother needs her medication. I was making $300 a week during the busy season. Now I'm bagging groceries for minimum wage, and it's not enough. His grandmother placed a protective hand on his shoulder. We manage, mijo. We always manage. But I could see the worry in her eyes. The same look my mother used to get when the bills piled up and the paycheck wasn't enough. I thanked them for their time and drove back toward Willowbrook, my anger building with each mile. Victoria Sterling wasn't just running my club poorly, she was actively harming the community it was supposed to serve. Her version of maintaining standards was really just discrimination dressed up in expensive clothing. When I got back to my hotel room, I called Patricia Caldwell. Marcus, how was your visit to the property? Enlightening, I said. Tell me everything you know about Victoria Sterling. Patricia pulled up her files. She was hired 8 months ago by the previous owner, Harrison Blackwell. She came from Oakmont Country Club in Pennsylvania, where she'd been assistant manager for 5 years. Her references were impeccable, and she was supposed to modernize operations and increase profitability. Has she been successful? Financially, yes. Revenue is up 18% since she started, and membership applications have increased. But what? There have been some complaints from longtime members about changes in club culture. Several families have canceled their memberships, claiming the atmosphere has become too rigid and unwelcoming. However, they've been replaced by new members who seem to prefer Sterling's approach. That explained everything. Victoria wasn't incompetent. She was strategic. She deliberately alienated certain members and staff to attract a different clientele, one that appreciated her authoritarian management style. The increased revenue came from attracting people who were willing to pay premium prices for the privilege of exclusivity. But it was my club, and I had very different ideas about who should feel welcome there. Patricia, I need you to arrange a meeting with the club's board of directors for Monday morning. Of course. Should I tell them what this is regarding? Just say the new owner wants to discuss club operations and future direction? It was a pause. Marcus, are you planning something dramatic? Because if you're thinking of making major changes, we should discuss the potential impact on your investment. The investment will be fine, I assured her, but some changes are definitely needed. After hanging up, I spent the evening researching everything I could find about Willowbrook's history and current operations. The club had been founded in 1951 by a group of local businessmen who wanted to create an exclusive retreat for Connecticut's elite. For decades, it had operated exactly as intended, a place where wealthy, white families could socialize without having to interact with people they considered beneath them. But times had changed. Even if Victoria Sterling hadn't gotten the memo, the surrounding communities had become increasingly diverse. And many of the area's most successful professionals were people who would never have been welcome at the old Willowbrook. Victoria's strategy of doubling down on exclusivity might have increased short-term profits, but it was ultimately unsustainable. More importantly, it went against everything I believed in. I'd grown up being told I didn't belong in certain places, that my dreams were too big for someone from my background. Now I had the power to change that narrative, at least in this small corner of Connecticut. I fell asleep that night planning my next moves, imagining the look on Victoria Sterling's face when she realized who she'd been so eager to dismiss. Treated me like an unwelcome intruder in my own property, and tomorrow she was going to learn exactly how expensive that mistake would be. The board meeting was scheduled for 10. Monday morning. By 11, Victoria Sterling's reign at Willowbrook Country Club would be over. The real work of transformation could begin. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp Connecticut sunshine that made everything look like a postcard. I'd spent Sunday night rehearsing what I was going to say. But as I drove through Willowbrook's gates at 9:30, my stomach was doing backflips. This wasn't just about reclaiming my property. It was about dismantling a system of discrimination that's been festering under my ownership. The board meeting was scheduled in the club's private conference room, located on the second floor of the main building. I arrived wearing the same jeans and t-shirt from Saturday, a deliberate choice that I knew would annoy Victoria Sterling. But this time, I carried a leather briefcase containing ownership documents, financial records, and a detailed plan for the club's future. Jennifer Walsh was at the reception desk again, and her eyes widened when she saw me approaching. "Sir, I thought we discussed this on Saturday," she said nervously. "You can't just—" "It's okay, Jennifer," I interrupted gently. "I'm expected upstairs." Before she could respond, Victoria Sterling's voice echoed from the grand staircase. "Is he doing here?" Victoria descended the stairs like a queen approaching her throne, wearing a black power suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Her expression mixed outrage with disbelief, as if my mere presence was a personal affront to the natural order of things. "Mrs. Sterling," I said pleasantly, "ready for our meeting?" "We don't have a meeting," she snapped. "Security will escort you out immediately." "Actually, we do have a meeting. The board of directors is expecting me in the conference room." Victoria's face flushed red. "The board meeting is for club business only. Members and invited guests exclusively. Then it's perfect that I qualify." "What?" before Victoria could respond. An elderly gentleman in an expensive navy blazer appeared at the top of the stairs. His silver hair was perfectly styled, and his bearing suggested someone accustomed to authority. "Mrs. Sterling, is there a problem?" Our guest should have arrived. By now, this had to be Charles Whitman, the board chairman. Patricia had briefed me on the 5-member board, all wealthy retirees who treated their positions as social honors rather than actual responsibilities. "Mr. Whitman," Victoria called up, "this individual is trespassing." He was asked to leave the premises on Saturday. Charles descended the stairs, his curious gaze shifting between Victoria and me. "I'm sorry, but who exactly are you?" Marcus Thompson, I replied, extending my hand. The new owner of Willowbrook Country Club? The silence that followed was deafening. Charles's handshake froze mid-grip, his mouth falling open slightly. Victoria looked like someone had just told her the earth was flat. That's impossible, Victoria, whispered. The new owner is a corporation. Blackwell Industries or something similar. Thompson Holdings, I corrected. My corporation. I bought this place 3 months ago. Charles recovered first, his decades of social training kicking in. Mr. Thompson, of course. Please forgive any confusion. We were expecting, well, someone different. Someone in a suit, you mean? Perhaps we should continue this conversation upstairs, Charles suggested diplomatically. Victoria remained frozen on the stairs, her face cycling through shock, embarrassment, and what looked like the beginning of panic. She'd spent the past few minutes treating her boss like a common intruder, and the implications were clearly sinking in. The conference room was exactly what I'd expected. Dark wood paneling, oil paintings of long-dead club founders, and a massive table that could seat 20 people. The other board members were already seated. Margaret Pemberton, a thin woman with steel-gray hair who owned half the boutiques in Eastridge. Harold Davidson, a retired banking executive whose family had been club members since 1952. And Dr. Richard Paulson, semi-retired physician who still maintained a practice in town. They all stared as I entered, their expressions ranging from confusion to barely concealed horror. Gentlemen, ladies, Charles began, I'd like you to meet Marcus Thompson, the new owner of Willowbrook Country Club. The introductions were awkward, with everyone clearly struggling to reconcile my appearance with their expectations. Victoria slumped into a chair at the far end of the table, looking like she was attending her own funeral. Mr. Thompson, Margaret Pemberton said carefully, we weren't aware you'd be joining us today. Mrs. Sterling didn't mention you'd be visiting. Mrs. Sterling and I met briefly on Saturday, I replied, taking a seat at the head of the table. She made quite an impression. Victoria's face went pale. Well then, Harold Davidson interjected. Perhaps we should discuss club operations. Mrs. Sterling has been doing excellent work improving our financial position. Yes, I've reviewed the numbers, I said, opening my briefcase. Revenue is up. Membership applications are increasing and expenses have been cut significantly. Very impressive on paper. Victoria straightened slightly, hope flickering in her eyes. However, I continued. I've also been reviewing how these improvements were achieved, and I have some concerns. I pulled out a folder containing my research. Let's start with vendor relationships. In the past 6 months, you've terminated contracts with several longtime service providers. Maria Santos, Landscaping, Chen Catering, Riverside Cleaning Services. Can you explain the reasoning behind these decisions? Victoria's confidence crumbled. Those vendors weren't meeting our new standards. We upgraded to more professional companies, more expensive companies, I corrected. Chen Catering charged $12 per person for event meals. Your new vendor charges $28. That's not an upgrade, that's price gouging. But the quality Robert Chen has been catering events in this area for 15 years with 0 complaints. His replacement has been in business for 18 months and is owned by your college roommate. Would you like to explain that coincidence? The board members exchanged glances. This was clearly news to them. Dr. Paulson cleared his throat. Mrs. Sterling, we weren't aware of your personal connections to the new vendors. I chose the best. Available options, Victoria said defensively. Personal relationships had nothing to do with it. What about Tommy Martinez? I asked. Victoria's face went white. Who told you about him? I met with Tommy and his grandmother yesterday. A 15-year-old boy who worked here for 3 years, never had a single complaint, earned money to help pay for his grandmother's medication. You banned him from the property for speaking Spanish. Care to explain that decision? It was disrupting the club atmosphere by speaking his native language with a member who specifically enjoyed conversing with him in Spanish. Dr. Elizabeth Hoffman tried to defend him, but you ignored her input and fired him anyway. Harold Davidson looked troubled. Mrs. Sterling, discrimination based on language or ethnicity is not only morally wrong, it's legally dangerous for the club. I was protecting our reputation, Victoria protested. This club has certain standards, certain traditions that need to be maintained. If we start accommodating every person who wanders in off the street, we'll lose everything that makes Willowbrook special. What makes Willowbrook special, I said quietly, is not the color of people's skin or the language they speak. It's the quality of the facilities, the beauty of the grounds, and the level of service we provide. Everything else is just prejudice dressed up as tradition. Margaret Pemberton leaned forward. Mr. Thompson, while we appreciate your perspective, you have to understand that our members have certain expectations. They pay premium dues for a particular experience. The experience of never having to see brown faces, except when they're serving drinks. The experience of knowing that anyone who doesn't look like them will be turned away at the door. The room fell silent. These people had spent their lives in environments where such things were never spoken aloud, where discrimination was practiced through coded language and polite exclusion. That's not what we're about, Charles said finally. We welcome anyone who meets our membership criteria. What criteria? Challenged myself. Because when I visited on Saturday, I was told I didn't meet your dress code standards and was escorted out. No one asked about my financial qualifications or membership application. The only criterion that mattered was that I didn't look like I belonged. Dr. Paulson shifted uncomfortably. If there was a misunderstanding, there was no misunderstanding. Your general manager made it crystal clear that people like me aren't welcome here. The only misunderstanding was hers. She didn't realize she was talking to her boss. Victoria finally found her voice. Mr. Thompson, if I made an error in judgment, I apologize. But surely you understand that maintaining club standards requires making difficult decisions sometimes. Difficult decisions, I repeated. Like firing a hard-working teenager because he speaks Spanish. Like replacing competent, minority-owned businesses with overpriced companies owned by your friends. Like creating an atmosphere so hostile that longtime members are canceling their memberships. I pulled out another document. Speaking of canceled memberships, let's talk about the families who've left since you took over. It's the Ramirez family. Members for 12 years? Left after their daughter was told her quinceañera celebration wasn't appropriate for the ballroom. The Kim family members for 8 years, left after you instituted a policy requiring English only in all club areas. The Jackson family, one of only 3 black families in the club, left after their teenage son was accused of stealing from the pro shop with no evidence. The board members looked increasingly uncomfortable. This was information they clearly hadn't been given. These weren't coincidences, I continued. This was a systematic campaign to change the club's demographics. You drove out diversity to attract members who were comfortable with discrimination. And yes, it increased revenue in the short term, because bigots are apparently willing to pay premium prices for the privilege of exclusivity. Harold Davidson looked stricken. Mrs. Sterling, are these allegations accurate? Victoria's composure finally cracked completely. You don't understand? When I took this job, the club was failing. Membership was declining, revenue was down, and we were facing bankruptcy. I had to make changes to survive. You had to make changes, I agreed. But not these changes. Not turning a country club into a fortress of prejudice. So what would you have done? Victoria snapped, her professional mask slipping entirely. Let the club fail to protect the feelings of some landscaper and a teenage caddy. I would have. Focused on what actually matters, excellent service, beautiful facilities, and fair treatment for everyone. You know what kills a club's reputation faster than diversity? Discrimination lawsuits, labor violations, bad publicity. You've made us vulnerable to all of those things. Margaret Pemberton looked worried. Are we facing legal action? Not yet, I said, but we're walking a tightrope. Tommy Martinez would have grounds for an age discrimination lawsuit. The terminated. Vendors could file bias complaints. Families who left could claim constructive eviction based on the hostile environment. Charles Whitman rubbed his temples. What do you propose we do? First, Mrs. Sterling's employment is terminated, effective immediately. Victoria shot to her feet. You can't do this. I have a contract. Do you have a contract that includes termination? Clauses for conduct detrimental to the club's reputation and interest. Discriminating against staff and members definitely qualifies. This is insane. I increased revenue by 18%. You increased revenue by turning our club into a place that decent people don't want to join. That's not a sustainable business. Strategy, it's short-term thinking that would have destroyed us within 5 years. Victoria gathered her purse with shaking hands. You'll regret this decision. The members you're trying to attract will never fit in here. They don't understand what makes a place like Willowbrook work. What makes Willowbrook work, I said as she headed for the door, is treating people with dignity and respect. Something you never learned. Dr. Paulson finally spoke. Mr. Thompson, we owe you an apology. We should have been more involved in club operations. If we'd known what was happening, you would have stopped it, of course, even if it meant lower profits, even if it meant some longtime members might leave. The silence stretched uncomfortably. Here's what's going to happen, I continued. We're going to rebuild this club the right way. We'll reach out to the vendors who were unfairly terminated and offer to reinstate their contracts. We'll contact the families who left and invite them back with sincere apologies. We'll implement diversity and inclusion training for all staff. And we'll make it clear that discrimination in any form will not be tolerated. Margaret Pemberton looked concerned. But what about our current members? Some of them specifically joined because of the atmosphere Mrs. Sterling created. Then they're welcome to leave. We're not running a country club. We're running a community center that happens to have membership dues. Anyone who can't handle that can find somewhere else to practice their prejudices. Charles nodded slowly. It won't be easy, which change never is, especially in an institution like this. Right thing is rarely easy, I replied, but it's still the right thing. As the meeting concluded and the board members filed out, I remained seated at the conference table looking out the window at the golf course. Tommy Martinez knew better than most members. Tomorrow I'd call his grandmother and offer him his job back with a raise. I'd contact Maria Santos and Robert Chen to discuss reinstating their contracts. I'd begin the long process of transforming Willowbrook from a fortress of privilege into a place where excellence and inclusion could coexist. It wouldn't be simple, and it wouldn't be cheap. But for the first time since buying the club, I felt like I was actually making a sound investment not just in property, but in the kind of community I wanted to help create. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass. These up, just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.